Good morning, everybody. Welcome very much to this panel discussion on how we can better reward teamwork. It's the start of a busy day for the festival. I hope you'll be able to join us later in the day too. Here in London, the sunshine is spilling through my living room window, and it very much feels like a day that's going to be good. I'm Ben Bliesdale. I'm part of the team behind Wellcome's Reimagine Research initiative. My pronouns are he and his, and for those joining us who maybe not be able to see me, I'm a white man with a beard and heavy frame glasses. I'm wearing a white shirt and I have brown hair that needs the barbers to reopen sooner rather than later. Now we're all here today to talk about creating a better research culture. Wellcome's Reimagine Research work has explored what needs to happen to build a working culture that's creative, that's inclusive, and that's honest. We've heard from people around the world on this topic, and teamwork has been a consistent theme. The same theme has appeared in a recent report from ARMA this week, which looked at culture amongst professional services staff at universities. And that said that even in the face of good intentions, the system at present values selfishness. So today we're going to be discussing how do we change that. I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel to discuss that today. And I hope we'll be able to leave this event with a renewed sense of how we can all work together to foster better teamwork in our workplace. Before I turn to our panelists, a couple of housekeeping items. First, on accessibility. You can activate closed captions via the settings, which is in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Live captions can be accessed via a link that's been shared in the chat. And I'm delighted to be joined today by our BSL interpreters, Peter, who is on screen right now, and a little bit later, Russell. You can resize their videos at any point, including during any slide presentations, by using a slider that appears when you hover your cursor over the screen. And finally, how do you take part? Well, I'm here to pose your questions to our panel, so please do submit these via the Q&A function you'll see towards the right hand of your screen. Let me know if you'd like to direct your question to any particular panelist as well. Finally, if you are on Twitter or social media, do share your thoughts using the hashtag #ReimagineResearch. So now I'll turn to our panelists, who I'm going to invite up one by one, first to introduce themselves and then to answer a question I have set each of them. So first of all, I'm going to turn to Philippa Saunders and invite Philippa to turn her video on. And as well as introducing herself, I would like Philippa, if you would answer this question for me. Do you think it's easier to engage in team science today than it was 5 years ago? Thanks.
Thanks, Ben, and to everybody, I hope you can see and hear me. It's wonderful to be part of this event. I'm speaking to you from Edinburgh this morning, where the sun is virtually shining. I'm wearing my favourite red stripy t-shirt. I'm a biomedical scientist, and I'm here representing the Academy of Medical Sciences. I'm a white woman, and my pronouns are she, her. So in response to Ben's quite challenging question, I think the answer is yes. Let's be optimistic at this point. So one of the things that struck me over the last few years is how the word team science have really become embedded much more in conversation. It's scarcely a meeting I go to when I don't hear this term mentioned, and particularly I hear it mentioned in terms of giving people a attribution and credit for what they're doing. So by way of history, I'd like to just cast my mind back to 2016, when the Academy of Medical Sciences team, of which I was a part, published a report, which I think the link has been shared to, which was called Team Science. And in that, we were very exercised as to whether individuals working in larger or even medium teams were being given really the credit for the contribution they were making. I have to say this was quite a personal issue for me, because I've always worked in teams. And when I was much younger and a junior scientist, I really felt that I did not get the credit for what I was doing. We did a follow-up workshop in 2018 because we felt this was something where we needed to keep up the pressure. And at that time, there was a really positive momentum in terms of publishing with the credit and ORCID systems, giving people an opportunity to highlight their work. The funders were getting much more exercised about giving people credit for contributing to the greater good by being part of larger teams or even medium teams. I'd say employers were lagging a bit behind. They still haven't quite got their HR systems and their promotional systems around this. But there was a real sense that within the research culture, we were talking about it more, and therefore I felt this was really positive. At the Academy, we'd been doing a lot of work to back up what we wanted to see in terms of cultural change by launching schemes to sustain women in science, the Flyer scheme, which was looking at future leaders. And we were very exercised with our mentoring, where we gave people mentoring and coaching to help them boost their profile. Where I am quite concerned, though, is that the COVID crisis has made some people less visible in their teams. People are falling behind in terms of being able to network, and I have concerns that we need to revisit this issue and keep up the pressure. And that's why I'm particularly pleased that we've got today's opportunity to discuss this. We've got a number of panelists who've got real experience, and we have nearly 300 attendees. So I'm really hopeful that we're going to have a lot of really great questions. I'm going to stop there because I think it's important that we give as much time as we can to conversation. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Philippa. That's a wonderful start. And as you say, I think the team science report really has set the bar for what we should be achieving, hopefully, discussion today. Following Philippa, I'm going to turn to Matthew Flinders and encourage him to turn his video on now. And again, as well as introducing himself, I'm going to ask Matt to answer this question for me. How do you think teamwork varies between disciplines, and how can we learn from any difference? Thanks, Matt.
Well, good morning, everybody, and it's a great pleasure to be here talking to you. My name is Matthew Flinders. I'm a professor of politics at the University of Sheffield. My pronouns are he, him. I suppose I'd say I'm a slightly large chap, as befits a former rugby player. And I'm wearing my favourite white shirt today for you. In terms of my background, I've just finished serving on the board of the ESRC, where the issue of research culture, equality, diversity and inclusion very clearly went up the agenda and received a lot more visibility. I think the work that the Academy of Medical Sciences did was really important in making that happen. And although I'm also positive, I think it's important not to overstate the progress that has been made, but to look to the opportunities that are coming in the future to really redefine a new research culture. So my question was about how does team science vary between the disciplines? And I suppose I would just respond by saying I think there's an obvious answer and there's a slightly more unusual answer. And so the obvious answer is, well, team science is more common as an academic endeavour within the STEM subjects. The existence of labs, workshops, engineering spaces. There is a culture of team science built in, but not to all areas of research, but there is a stronger culture of team science. In the arts, humanities and social sciences, there is far more of a lone scholar traditional model. And in many ways, it was interesting as a social scientist reading the Academy of Medical Sciences work, because I think the social sciences, arts and humanities have been a little bit behind the curve in keeping up with the shifting landscape, which is heading more towards a team-based approach. The slightly more unconventional answer, slightly provocative answer, is that I actually think the social sciences, arts and humanities have a lot to offer the understanding and doing of team science, because it's those disciplines that study human behaviour, culture, interaction, And what we do know is that sometimes where team science is done, it's not always done in the most inclusive, fair, or open manner. So maybe, although team science isn't common within the social sciences, arts and humanities, it's those disciplines that have an as yet unrealized potential to help shape how we want to redefine, reinvigorate, reimagine team science.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Matt. And I think that's a really helpful provocation for us to consider today, is lessons that we can draw across and to improve our understanding of how to build those team cultures. I'll next move to Dawn Edge and invite Dawn to turn her video on. And just before I pose a question to Dawn, I just remind the audience that do share any questions that you think of during these talks in the Q&A function, and we'll be coming to those as soon as we have finished these opening remarks. So Dawn, it's a delight to have you here, and if you'd like to introduce yourself and perhaps offer a question, offer an answer to this question, what do you think teams are losing out on with the exclusionary environments that we often see in research? Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you, Ben, and hello everyone. My name is Dawn Edge, and I am a Professor of Mental Health and Inclusivity at the University of Manchester. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the UK geography, we're in the north of England. And my pronouns are she and her, and I'm a black woman. I'm wearing glasses and I have dreadlocks. I'm wearing a blue and white pattern dress with a black jacket. So, what are teams losing out on with exclusionary environments we often see in research? Wow. Well, both Philippa and Matthew have mentioned team science, and I guess that begs a question of who's in the team. And with that, also issues of power and accountability and people's ability to contribute. So I think one of the biggest things that we're missing out on is just the diversity of ideas and the opportunities to come up with really different solutions, both by having researchers from different backgrounds, but more importantly for me as a health service researcher, including the people who are actually the recipients of care and the people who deliver care, so service users or patients, carers, and to a certain extent also frontline staff whose voices are all rarely prominent in research creation and research design and research delivery. So the focus of the work that I do is almost exclusively on co-production. So I work on co-producing psychosocial interventions, and we do that with people rather than for them. But that requires quite a shift in thinking. So, making sure that community members, people with lived experience are involved in identifying the topics of research interest, being able to contribute to the research design, research management, and also the evaluation. And that also means that we need to think about capacity building, because there's little point in bringing people in as service users, carers, community members into research teams without actually equipping them to be researchers as partners, and importantly, moving them along the journey from being kind of contributors, so what's euphemistically called PPI or PPIE, patient to public involvement, and moving them on to actually potentially developing research careers, if that's part of what they want to do. And so when we're going to bring people in, I think it's important then for us to think about the environments into which we bring people. So to what extent are we creating inclusive research environments which will enable diversity to flourish? And just a final thought is to remember that, if we continue to do what we've always done, so if our notion of team science is to reproduce what we do now, but actually making sure that people get more credit, which is great, that's very important. But if we do what we've always done, then we'll continue to get what we've always had. Time for change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. I think there's a lot for us to take away there, and I'm kind of taken by the connections with the talk we had yesterday as well from Robin Stewart from Heart and Soul, speaking about exactly your point about who's in the team, who counts as the researcher, how do we connect with the populations that we're there to serve as well. So for those of you who maybe missed yesterday's recording, I'd highly recommend going back and catching up on that as well. Wonderful. Well, following Dawn, I'd like to turn to Jeroen Geurts, who's joining us from the Netherlands. And please do come and turn your video on there, Jeroen. We're delighted to have you join us today. And the question we have set for you is, how can we better reward teamwork in research? Over to you, Jeroen.
Thank you very much, Ben. I think I have a few slides, so if they could be started, that would be great. In the meantime, I'll introduce myself. I'm Jeroen Geurts. I'm a professor of neuroscience and the president of the Dutch health funder Zon&W, and also a board member of the science funder NWO. So I'll give you a funder's perspective about how we can better reward teamwork in research. My pronouns are his and him and he, and I'm wearing a blue jacket, and I'm a white male, and I'm sitting in front of a bookcase that I really love. All right, so how can we better reward teamwork in research? If we go to the first slide. Yep. Team science, I think, in the Netherlands is a part of a new movement. In 2019, there was a joint statement of universities, university medical centers, and research institutes and research funders to focus more on quality instead of quantity, to promote open science, and to reward less individualism and more team effort. Universities are now talking about how to build and maintain teams, talk about team roles, researchers versus support staff, etc. And funders are focusing on consortium building and interdisciplinarity. And the funding instruments at NWO and Zon&W now have a greater emphasis on team science and on cross-disciplinary collaboration already. Next slide, please. We have a national research agenda in the Netherlands, which is all about building teams. So the Dutch government invested significantly in 2018, and following this investment, about 12,000 individual questions were collected from science and society that led to 25 routes, for example, the neuroscience route or the origin of life route or something like that. And NWO and Zon&W ask applicants to build strong multidisciplinary and lasting teams. They can come to us funders for for different projects of about $500,000 to $10 million. They have to include interdisciplinary consortia and relevant social partners, societal partners, I should say, who also come up with 10% of co-financing. And an example of one of those successfully granted consortia was on cognitive rehabilitation in multiple sclerosis, and it included the consortium included neurologists, rehab physicians, psychologists, health and safety officers, fitness instructors, pharmaceutical companies, and an MS patient forum, really showing this wide range of collaboration. Next slide, please. Another thing that we're working on is to kind of innovate our Dutch Nobel Prize. It's the highest award in science. It's called the Spinoza and Stephen Prize. And then as of 2020, teams of scientists are eligible alongside individuals. You have to be, if you go for a team award, then you have to have a demonstrably greater effect than individual achievements. And that, I think, is immediately also the issue. Apart from the fact that it took us 20 years or more to move from individualized awards to more team-guided awards, it also has to be defended now that you have to that you want to go for a team award, and that is, I think, something that should be much more normal. So we're still struggling a little bit with this. Next slide, please. We also have a Team Science Award, which is given to small teams that can get 10,000 euros for working together and jointly taking on a scientific challenge in which their individual strengths and expertise reinforce each other. So we kind of want to make examples out of teams and then give them an award to stimulate other teams. Next slide, please. And the final thing that we're thinking about now as funders is to encourage the use of credit, which is a system that describes 14 contributor roles, like, for example, conceptualization or data curation or project administration. And we really hope that lab technicians and engineers and research assistants who normally stand a little bit in the shadow of their PIs are now empowered to also show what their contribution to the team has been. Next slide, please. So there's still a way to go. There's a number of things that we've set up as funders, but we still have a way to go. Individualistic science has been strongly encouraged in the past decades, and I think funders and research performing
I think we might have lost you there, Jeroen. I think we might have a bad connection, I'm afraid. So I think if we can perhaps come back to Jeroen's closing points, if he's able to rejoin us in the next few moments. So yeah, if we could take the slides down for the moment. Perfect, thank you. Yeah, as I say, we'll hopefully get connected back to Jeroen in the near future. But in the meantime, I'm delighted to hand over to our final speaker in the lineup, who's going to lead us into the Q&A, Heidi. Heidi, if you're happy to introduce yourself, and perhaps you can offer some thoughts on the following question, which is, in your role as the leader of a major research centre, where do you draw your energy and support from? Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Heidi Johansenberg, and I'm Director of the Wellcome Centre for Integrative Neuroimaging at the University of Oxford. I use she, her pronouns. Visually, I'm a white woman with long brown hair and glasses, wearing a grey jumper. So my question was, in your role leading a research centre, where do you draw energy and support from? I think I primarily draw energy and support from the people that I work with. I'm lucky to be surrounded by fantastic colleagues virtually now at all levels. I think being a research leader, whether that's leading your own research group or whether that's leading a whole institute, can be isolating. I think there probably is some truth in the cliche that it's lonely at the top. So as a leader, it's not possible to keep everybody happy all the time or to be everybody's friend all the time. People tend to treat you differently when they see you as their boss rather than their peer, and that can sometimes feel isolating. It can feel strange as you come through a career and then take on this different role. I'm therefore very thankful to have many supportive senior colleagues, both across my university and further afield, as well as supportive mentors that I've accumulated and hung on to throughout my career. And I do reach out to these people for advice from time to time still. And I think it's really important that people continue to feel able to do that as they gain seniority. Don't see it as a weakness to ask for support or advice from others. We tend to think of leaders as having all the answers. We really don't have all of the answers. And we need to listen and seek advice just as much as we need to direct others and take decisions. Going back to the things that provide me with energy or buzz in my work, I think that's really evolved over time. So as an early career researcher, you tend to get that buzz from your own direct research successes, designing a beautifully elegant experiment or getting some key piece of data. And these things obviously do continue to be exciting and motivating in my own group's research practice, but I also personally increasingly gain energy or buzz from facilitating others, from connecting people and projects together so that they can then go off and do great things. And in this way, I tend to see the role of the research leader a bit like a curator at an exhibition, so gaining energy from putting together a portfolio of people and projects rather than having to be the creator of those individual pieces of work. An important thing to bear in mind, thinking about what the other speakers have just spoken about, is that being able to take on this role really relies on a system that rewards collective successes and not just individual success. And then finally, I certainly draw huge support from the appreciation of others, feedback from others. We all want feedback on how we're doing, from when we're kids throughout life. We all want to feel appreciated. That doesn't go away when you get more senior. Research can be a really tough job when it comes to feedback. We all get a lot of negative feedback every day, failed experiments, paper rejections, grant failures. And those big bits of positive feedback, a paper being accepted or a grant being accepted, can be really sporadic and unpredictable. So to feel positive about your job, you really need day-to-day wins, day-to-day successes. As a leader, you tend to get a lot of feedback on what people don't like and much less about what people do like. And don't get me wrong, I think negative feedback, constructive criticism is incredibly valuable, is something we should all actively seek out and learn from. But we should also keep in mind that research leaders, just like everybody else, also need some positive reinforcement. And so we should remember to appreciate our colleagues day to day, even this. Right, I shall hand back to Ben. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi. I think that kind of description as a viewing the eyes as a curator is a really nice one to think about, and I think that's a really helpful way. Jeroen, I think you've joined us again. I'm sorry about the connection problems. I wondered if you wanted to just offer any kind of closing comments just to wrap up. I'm sorry about the disruption there.
No problem. I just got kicked out, I think, at the last slide. I just wanted to say that we've come a long way in the sense that we've done a lot of new things in terms of team science, but there's also still some way to go as individualistic science has been encouraged for decades. So that was my closing remark.
That's a perfect one to lead us into the Q&A as well. So wonderful. I'll invite all of our panelists to turn their videos back on and join us. And I'm pleased to say that the Q&A chat is already full of questions. So I'm going to try and pose these to you as quickly as I can. I think we've had some really interesting remarks actually, and people are really appreciating the kind of things that you've been sharing today. I thought this would be a really interesting one to start us off, and it's quite a personal perspective. And I thought perhaps I could come to Dawn first to answer it. So the person has written, I have significant disabilities that have been getting worse. I don't feel I can be a PI anymore in clinical research, too much brain fog too often. But how can roles be redefined to allow me to participate and get credit for what I can do? So Dawn, I wonder if you have any thoughts to share on that question.
Well, first of all, just to thank the questioner for, we shouldn't have to say that's a courageous thing to say, it should be in this kind of environment, but it still is. And I think really, this focus on team science would mean that somebody in this position should be able to be, for example, a co-PI. So all the skills, all the knowledge, all the expertise that person has shouldn't be lost because they have, they have a disability of some kind. And I think working together with somebody else as a co-PI is an excellent way of doing it, or chief investigator, or whatever the term is. So you jointly lead something. So your intellectual contribution is still very much being acknowledged and reflected in whatever reward system. But at the same time, it's taking into consideration there will be times when you may not be able to contribute as much, but whatever work you're doing still needs clear leadership. And it's very obvious within the team who that other person is. But yes, I think we just need to be a bit more creative in the way we think about truly enabling people to participate.
Thank you, Dawn. I wonder if any of our other panelists want to chip in on that particular question.
Yeah, maybe then maybe just a brief comment. It also brings to mind other groups who might not see a full-time, full-on research career as being right for them for whatever reason, for caring responsibilities, for example. And I think that we really need to do more to be accepting of multiple different models. We tend to think being a scientist is an all-encompassing thing that needs to be a proper scientist. You need to be thinking about your science day and night. And I think, personally, we need to move away from that model and recognise that people can make really valuable contributions in compartmentalize bits of their time and life that are incredibly useful, and that it's more to do, with the quality of the contribution rather than necessarily the number of hours that somebody can devote to it. So I think having more flexibility in general within science careers would be very valuable.
Thanks, Heidi. Matt, should we come to you next, and then Philippa?
I think it's a really interesting question that I have been pushing the research councils on, because at the moment, as far as I'm aware, you can only have one single principal investigator, and moving to a model where you have a team of more than one would create a whole new raft of leadership opportunities, which dovetail with some of the issues that Heidi was raising about bringing on future talent. And I think that issue on talent is really key here. We seem to define talent very narrowly in academia, and actually we need to be far more creative in seeing that different people bring different talents to the table, and the essence of good science is bringing that team together.
Thanks, Matt. And Philippa?
Yes, absolutely. I just want to say that this issue of being able to have co-Is, which I see as a hot topic in the chat, is one that we raised originally at the Academy with the funders when we did the team science report. We looked at some of the other ways that people can lead things in a more holistic way, and some examples of work packages in EU grants. But I absolutely agree with all the previous speakers that this sort of narrow focus on you're only going to be excellent if you live, breathe and give up your life to science is completely wrong. And one of the things that we've really learned over the last year is we must be much more flexible and adaptable to people's individual needs. I mean, just colleagues who've had to homeschool have not been able to go in and do the work they might have done. But what's the positive? It's shown that we can do a lot more remotely. We can do a lot more in short bursts. We can do things, we can accommodate people's physical needs, and we can accommodate much more flexible working. And this is what we need to get out of this crisis, is a much more flexible approach. I'm sure we all agree with that. I mean, that's the point of a team. Everyone's got something they could contribute. And it might be quite small, but it might be quite big, but it should adapt to the needs of the work.
Thanks, Philippa. And Jeroen, I'll come to you next. And actually, there's a link here to another question which feels like it links to this one, which I would like to pose to you as well, which is specifically how do funders adapt to funding beyond just an individual approach and the kind of consequences that has, which we've just described. So I feel that links quite nicely here about appreciating a broader contribution. Jeroen, it'd be great to hear what you think.
Yeah, so I think funders have an obligation to look beyond the model that we've been adopting for a number of decades now, and I've tried to give a few examples of what could be done in terms of trying to promote team prizes, or to show that the highest awards in a country can also be awarded to a team. But what I find is that it's still very much common. The common thing to do is to look for individual greatness. Who has come up with this idea? Who has found the solution to this problem? Instead of looking for an entire team, we're looking for individuals who had the genius idea. And I was just thinking about the previous Q&A, the previous question in the Q&A. One of the PIs in my own research team has lupus, and over the years he has steadily decreased in terms of his bodily and also mental function. And we've been trying to have a discussion within the group. How and if we can kind of shift tasks such that he can do what he's good at, which is making computer programs and coming up with great ideas for IT solutions, instead of having him present to let's say money givers and writing papers, etc., which is much more difficult for him. So we've tried to work around his issues, his problems, by discussing it openly within the team. And actually, I think that's going very well. So it's very well possible to give somebody who has disability a role within the team that is fit for him or her.
Thanks, Jeroen. And it feels like the system, as you say, needs to adapt to that rather than expecting individuals to conform within the system as it exists at present.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Wonderful. Well, let's move to another question. I actually want to kind of pose one to you all to think about, and then I'm going to pose a more specific one to Matt in the meantime, while you give you a bit of time to think about it. There's been a really good question here, following on from Heidi's point, actually, which is saying that researchers often gauge their success and job satisfaction based on research outcomes, which are at times kind of, hard to kind of have control over, and can be a bit difficult to kind of gauge on. And the person's asked, what sort of measures of success and satisfaction would we like researchers to be taking pride from and to kind of be drawing energy from? So I wonder if you can all have a think about what you would suggest in your environment that you personally find motivating and that you kind of find sustains you through the challenges of the job. In the meantime, to give you a bit of time to think about that, I thought I'd come to Matt specifically with a question that follows on from his contribution. Matt, someone's asked exactly what sort of ways we could facilitate better exchange of good practice and models of team science between disciplines. And, does that exist at an institutional level? What in your mind would that look like if you could have a forum to share those ideas?
Okay, so if you think about what facilitates world-class research that is scholarly brilliant but has clear social relevance, that research generally comes from facilitating mobility, the mobility of people, ideas and talent across traditional disciplinary, organisational and professional boundaries. What we have at the moment is a very rigid, bureaucratic, cumbersome beast, which actually is almost, I would say, incentivised to prevent mobility happening. We all know and understand interdisciplinary work is very hard to make happen within an institution. It gets even harder when it's a research grant that spans institutions. And there is a bit of an elephant in the room here, that we're talking very nicely about the ideals, and it's great that we have a panel member from the Netherlands. Now, the Netherlands has a very different political culture. That political culture, dare I say, is slightly more mature, slightly more consensual, slightly more inclusive. In the UK, we have to be aware that our institutions have been set up in a competitive relationship where often team science works against the incentives of institutions to compete with each other. And I think at a big level, it's that challenge of how do we really facilitate meaningful team science when at the same time we're all expected to compete against each other.
Thanks, Matt. Jeroen, actually, I'd be interested, from your perspective, how does that kind of collaborative mindset work in the Netherlands? Have you, in your experience of the UK system, perhaps seen that kind of difference play out?
I think I do recognize that a little bit. In the Netherlands, we're a small country, so we kind of travel the distance literally in between institutions. There is absolutely competition in the Netherlands as well, and too much competition to my taste. But we do have this joint position paper that came out in 2019, where funders and research performing organizations and hospitals and the Royal Academy all stated that they wanted to work together towards more team-oriented science. So that is, I think, that has been a good move for our young scientists who really felt that they couldn't function in a hyper-competitive world anymore. So they've really thanked us for this move. So I would say that is, and it's also something that in the European Commission we're now talking about, whether or not this collaborative statement making is something that should be done more broadly.
Thanks, Jeroen. And I think those international perspectives are going to be really helpful. I think the fact that research culture in lots of different phraseologies and different forms is being discussed across the world, I think is a really helpful development. So just back to my earlier question about kind of where do we want researchers to be taking their measures of success and satisfaction from. I wonder if you've had time to percolate on any interesting thoughts from your own perspectives, and perhaps Philippa, I could come to you first if there's anything you want to share. Particularly, I know that the Academy has the Flyers program, which involves people at their early career stages. I wonder what in that program you're looking to instill in the mindsets of early career researchers.
Yes, thanks, Ben. I think this follows on really interestingly from the previous conversations. Some of what we need to do is invest in people much more broadly and enable them to gain skills broadly, because I think that's going to empower them going forward. So certainly at the Academy, we've recognised that there's a huge issue in terms of broadening people's perspectives so that they are able to make good contributions and feel pride in what they can achieve. So I think there's a couple of things. I always get quite nervous about mobility because that implies people need to physically move, and I think that disadvantages people, particularly women, at certain stages in their life course. At the Academy, we've been thinking about partnerships, about empowering people and giving them experience across different disciplines, because we think this is really going to help them in their team activities and also give them satisfaction in their working lives. So we've built academic research partnerships as a sort of flexible way to encourage mobility between clinicians and others. And our flyer scheme is really proving very successful. So in this scheme, we've asked people to put themselves forward and commit to some time where they can work with individuals from other disciplines. There is an element of mobility. But what we want to do is expose people in maybe an academic, narrow life to those working in industry or in the NHS. And the biggest thing that's come out of this is the peer-peer interactions. These people have so enjoyed meeting people from other disciplines. And my hope is that as we move forward in the future, it won't be, we as leaders can do what we can to encourage things. We can lobby the funders and we can do other things. But it's the people coming up behind us who really are going to benefit from a more flexible approach. So that's what in the Academy we're trying to mentor, empower, and really give a voice to those people behind us. As a personal note, I'd say the greatest satisfaction I get in my working life is encouraging younger people to realise their full potential. This is sometimes to encourage them to leave the field and go elsewhere, but equally it's also to encourage them to put their names forward, challenge themselves and move on and take any opportunity they can. And just to echo what Dawn said, the other thing that has absolutely invigorated my science has been meeting patients who need care. And I work in a women's health area that's underrepresented and is a chronic pain condition and a non-visible challenge for the people. So this has empowered me. Thank you.
Thanks, Philippa. And it's really wonderful to hear more about the Flyers programme. For those who received the email this morning for the festival, there is a link in there if you want to learn more. So please do check that out. I think we'll come next to Jeroen and then Dawn.
Thank you. Yeah, I really agree with Philippa in that young people should be leading in improvements that we're making towards team science, and I think they cannot but do that because they feel that they are growing up in a world that is not fitting to them anymore. Our newer generation of researchers, at least in the Netherlands, we really see that is much more focused on collaboration and on interdisciplinarity than the previous generations. So they feel that in a hyper-competitive individualistic world, they can't perform and can show their identity as a researcher. So I think it's very important that we let them speak and tell us what they need.
Thank you. And Dawn as well?
Yeah, so just to follow on from that, I think, and also Philippa's point about enabling people and people to grow. So I have to be at the moment of confession to say that I have a little bit of difficulty with kind of coaching and mentoring models, not because I don't think that they're good things, because I think they are. The concern I have is that too often they reinforce the notion that the problem lies within the individual. And if we just fix this person by, giving them a bit of coaching or put them on this program, then that's going to actually sort things out. But we need to actually acknowledge, and I think that's what we're doing in this festival, which is fantastic, is that we're talking about systems-wide problems, things that are deeply embedded within structures. So just a very personal example, when I first applied to go from lecturer to senior lecturership and didn't succeed at my first attempt and was devastated and asked for some feedback, and I watched the person who was giving me the feedback squirm for about half an hour without being able to actually tell me why I hadn't been successful. Because the criteria that were there, I'd matched the criteria, but they couldn't actually tell me what accounted for my lack of success. So, being me, I took it to other people and got somebody to sit down with me and look at my CV. And the first thing she said is, you need to get rid of all those we's. There's too much we in what you've written. You've got to talk about I. You've got to demonstrate what you've done, what you've brought. So unless we change the cultures and the systems of reward, then actually there is going to be always this dissonance for those of us who feel that we want to recognize and acknowledge and celebrate collaboration, but actually the system only rewards individual efforts.
Dawn, I think that's a really important point for us all to take away. And as you say, Wellcome is hosting this event today, not to tick a box to say we hosted an event, but because we want to hear what needs to change and to make sure as a funder that we can live up to that and play our role in fostering those changes. Because as you say, if the individuals are left to kind of navigate what is a very difficult system, I think it takes a huge toll. And we want to make sure that as a funder that we can contribute as much as possible in a positive way to culture. That's been a really helpful piece of insight. Oh yes, Jeroen, I'll come back to you.
I was just thinking while listening to Dawn, is it in any way conceivable that in the UK, for example, led by Wellcome, there would be a discussion and let's say a positioning around newer team science like ideas that kind of unites researchers and funders and academies, just like we did in the Netherlands. Would that be conceivable in the UK as well? Because it really helped. It really helped us in the Netherlands to go forward together.
I think it's an excellent question. Actually, we've got a new culture strategy due from the government in the next couple of months, which we hope will offer some of that coordination and that sense of vision that will help the sector work together, and particularly help galvanise public funding in the UK to really embrace some of these things, because I think there's so much power in the biggest funding pots, and in the UKRI is by far the largest. So the fact that they're already talking about culture in a very different way now than they were a couple of years ago, I think really demonstrates there's a willingness to change some big things in the system, which is really exciting. I'm aware we've only got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try and get through the last couple of questions with you all and make the most of our remaining time. I wanted to come perhaps to Heidi with this question, which is about the person's asked, where do we stop with team as a description? Does it only count for researchers, or what about the professional staff who contribute to research in other ways? And I think, particularly in your role leading an institution, you must have a great appreciation for all the people who make research happen. And I wondered if you could give us some thoughts on who counts as the team.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. It's something we do think a lot about. We're very lucky as a Wellcome Centre, we're very lucky through our core funding to be able to support a phenomenal world-class core team of research facilitators of different types. They might be technical, they might be administrative, various different types of people who are underpinning the research, but are not the sort of individual scientists on a PI trajectory. So it's something we think a lot about, precisely because so many of our success metrics and reward mechanisms are purely focused on that PI individual science model. So we need to, we massively value that core team, but we need to sort of create the mechanisms by which they can develop and feel appreciated. So, we've outside of the system, because the system doesn't really cater to progression of people in those careers. So we've explored things like ways in which we can provide things like training. So very high level professional training to recognise that there's career development and individual development within those non-PI type roles. But I think having more support or structure from both the universities and funders to recognise how these phenomenally valuable individuals can progress through a career more in a more recognised way would be incredibly useful. We've looked at things. There are day-to-day things that we can have control over, celebrating successes that are within our control, to do with achievements in terms of operation of facilities and doing things well and delivering projects. Those things can all be celebrated in a sort of local bottom-up way, and we can recognise different types of contributions that people would make. So we can try to improve our day-to-day work and culture to value all members of the team. But I completely agree with the points that others have made about, ultimately we need the top-down as well, for there to be ways in which career structures, etc., can provide a framework for people to progress who are outside of that PI model.
Thank you, Heidi. I think that's a really helpful thing for us all to consider. And even through Wellcome's work on gathering evidence on the research culture, we were very mindful of trying to include the broadest interpretation of who counts in that group, because that immediately otherwise excludes people's perspectives. And I was quite taken when we were on the road doing, back in the days when we were allowed to be on the road, out doing physical events. We ran a town hall up in the northeast, and in that room we had a whole collection of different people from different backgrounds talking about culture. And at the end, someone put their hand up and said, I'm a member of the kind of professional services staff at a local university, and actually this is the first time anyone's ever asked me what my working environment is like and how I'd like to improve it. So I think giving people a voice and making sure we take those points seriously is going to be absolutely key to getting this right and getting it to stick in the future. Dawn, I wondered if I could come to you with a question that someone's put in the Q&A here, specifically asking what changes you've seen work for making research environments have space for people of different backgrounds, and what sort of changes, big or small, that you've seen really have an impact.
I think, because I'm very much a glass half full person, I'm very hopeful. I'd like to say that we are a work in progress. I think I'm seeing more every day, and I think obviously because I work in health service research, the biggest shift has been the greater involvement of service user researchers, particularly in the mental health field. And I think the more we can look at those kind of models, where we're going back to the earlier point about who's in the team and who do we really need to be in the team, because I think it's, for a long time we've done health services research. We've developed all kinds of interventions, in the area I'm in, psychosocial interventions, that just don't get implemented, and when they're nobody uses them. So maybe if we start by asking people about what they really want, how to make those things more accessible, so we actually get them involved in the design, but also importantly in the development delivery, but the evaluation, because very often we kind of take things back then and we do that because that's the real science. So it is a mindset. I think it's shifting our thinking, but there are definitely people who are doing more and more of this work, and it's to be encouraged, I think.
Thank you, Dawn. And then just perhaps we can do one final question before we begin to wrap up the session. And perhaps I can pose this one to Jeroen to start with, which is it's around publications and the publishing industry and research. And you mentioned the credit taxonomy, and I know Philippa has mentioned it as well. And I'd be really interested to know, the question here poses, is credit enough in terms of offering that from the supply side, as it were? What changes do perhaps publishers need to make as well to being better able to attribute and understand people's different contributions? So, Jeroen, if I could come to you first on that one.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't think it's enough. Credit gives us some opportunity to discuss roles within teams and to make explicit different roles. So also for people who are very much fundamental to the research, but are not often credited or don't often appear in the spotlight. But I also think that, for example, funders, and we're working on this actively, should instruct their committees to discuss in interviews with researchers about what their team is like and why they have built their team as they did, and whether there are any improvements that they can make in their team. So much more about team science, about the building of the consortium, than about let's say the basic research idea or the role of the individual PI. And we're making that shift towards having more, let's say, a more active consciousness of the team roles and the building of the teams. But it's something that we really should invest further in as funders, absolutely.
Thanks, Jeroen. And Philippa, I wondered, is there anything that the Academy would like to see done on this front?
I completely agree with Jeroen. I think what Credit did and that Team Science report did was it started the conversation. I think it's fallen a bit by the wayside personally, and I think there's been, people have bent the system, as people will always do. I think we need a much more open discussion about team leadership. This was one of the things that came through in the Team Science report very strongly, that how a team works and how people respect each other's contribution can be very much influenced by the person who is perceived as the leader of that team and their attitude towards inclusivity in terms of co-leading or otherwise. I think there's a lot more we need to do to look at structures of teams. We need to have a much more open conversation about people's credibility as leaders. I know in my own career, I have had to work with people who have abused that power imbalance and have also not given me credit for my work. And I don't think leaders are born. I don't think just because you're a great scientist, it makes you a great leader. I think there's a real role for actual professional leadership training at an early age. I really do feel that. And I see it coming through the system.
Thank you, Philippa. And I think, certainly our research as well has shown that, doing supervision and management and leadership well takes time and energy and expertise, and that needs to be valued and supported in the system. So, I think that's a really helpful note for us to finish on. So I'm aware we've got a couple of minutes left. I think it's been a wonderful discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. I've made lots of notes. I'm really keen that we get one last bit of kind of insight from each of you before I let you go. And I wondered, in place of a closing remark, I'd like to pose one final question to each of you, and perhaps you could kind of offer it in a sentence or two as a very brief reply. But I wanted to know each of you in turn what action you'd personally like to take away from this session. So what have you heard that you would like to see put into action in the wider system, and to really improve the way that teamwork is supported? And I'll go in reverse order than we started in. So I will come to Heidi first, if I may.
I think one concrete thing, I just saw a few interesting comments on the chat, people pointing to universities that had good practice in terms of career structures for technical staff, for example. So personally, that's something that I'm going to follow up on that's a domain in which I might be able to have some influence. So I'm going to look at those examples very carefully. Thank you for the suggestion.
Wonderful. Thanks, Heidi. Jeroen, if we could come to you next.
Yeah, I just feel enormously reinforced by this discussion, and I really want to make a big compliment to Wellcome to have this to organize this discussion around team science. I'm going back to the Netherlands with an extra impetus to work on those committees who are going to interview people and who are really at the fire, so to say, of getting team science realized. So I'm going to invest in those teams even more. Thanks.
Rowan, that's really helpful, and I will steal Heidi's phrasing and say that we were mere curators at Wellcome, but I think it's been wonderful to see the community come together to share their thoughts on this. Next, I'll come to Dawn.
So I'm going to, I have a role at the university as an academic lead for equality, diversity and inclusion, and I'm going to work with others to make sure that we explore some of this in the way we inform our HR processes. So thinking about what comes into people's PDR, so what incentives are there for leaders to demonstrably be bringing other people on, and opportunities for people in their career pathways to talk about what are the barriers in a really meaningful way, and then ways to overcome them. So yeah, working more with HR, I think, to change the system.
Thank you, Dawn. And Matt, I'll come to you next.
Well, I think it would be fantastic to take this idea from the Netherlands about a really big national statement about team science to build the momentum, and to think about how that might be published and promoted in order to put it at the heart of the planned review of REF that is coming up in 2022. I think that is the opportunity that will open, that we could play a positive role in helping to push in the right direction.
Thanks, Matt. And obviously with the REF process coming to its close right now, I think it will be high in people's minds. Philippa, we'll come to you as our final word.
Just very brief to say thanks to Wellcome for really keeping our feet to the fire on this topic. I think it's very, very interesting to see. Particularly, I'm invigorated by all the discussion in the chat. I'm going to go back to the Academy. It's just over 2 years since we did our review of our team science report. Now is the moment for us to look again at what progress has been made, what holes there are, and what we as an influencing group can bring to bear on policymakers, funders, and indeed also the publishers and employers. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Wonderful, and that brings us to a close. So just to say thank you who's made this session possible, not least our panelists today who've been wonderful, our audience as well, thank you for joining us, and as ever this has been a team endeavour at Wellcome and I'm just here representing it, so thank you to all of the people in the team who've made this happen. I hope the session's left you with some great ideas, not just to think about but hopefully to act on as well, and if you can, do join us later in the day for our 2 remaining sessions or catch up with them online afterwards. With that, thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Thanks everybody.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.